to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I am your host, Ange, and I welcome you to episode number 4. Today's podcast is an excerpt from a Coffee and Conversation that ran held on the 21st of September, 2022. Portions of this episode have been redacted due to the confidential nature of the content at the request of the individuals who participated. Since this podcast deals with mental health challenges, many episodes may contain triggering topics. This episode specifically mentions suicide. We will include additional support resources at the end of the episode as well as in the show notes. So, fill up your coffee and let's get started.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Erin and I'm one of the founding members of Recovery Advocate Network. With me today are a handful of my colleagues along with our speakers for today's program. I'll let them tell you more about themselves when they present, but I speak for everyone when I say we are glad that you are here today. This is our second Coffee and Conversation event and we're so excited that you've chosen to join us today. The purpose of today's program is to help educate people, not only on what our organization is and what we aim to accomplish, but also to assist in opening the general dialogue around suicide, acknowledging the prevalence of suicide and suicide ideation in society, and recognizing the large disparity in financial resources available for treatment. This morning's program is going to kick off with a brief video dedicated to the Semicolon tattoo and its meaning in the world today. You'll hear from a gentleman who has a family perspective. He's a father who lost his son last December due to suicide. Before we start this morning's program, though, I do want to take a moment to share a bit about our organization. Recovery Advocate Network, or RAN as we call it, took shape in the summer of 2021 as our founding board members discovered each other through common ground. Some having experienced the challenges of mental health treatment firsthand, while others saw loved ones, family, and friends experience similar challenges. Long story short, we recognize that society in general does not treat mental illness with appropriate measures. Much of mainstream society still harbors antiquated perceptions of what mental illness exactly means. For many, it means depression or anxiety, while others classify it to mean substance abuse or addiction. But others see it as PTSD, trauma, process disorders, sexual identity challenges, and so on. But the truth of the matter is they're all mental health related disorders, which often overlap. And individuals who are diagnosed with them deserve access to treatment, whether that be regular therapy, outpatient programs, inpatient programs, support groups, sober living, and so on. Because of this, we at Recovery Advocate Network seek to remove the financial barriers to treatment by offering scholarships to those who are dedicated to their recovery. We hope to reduce the financial burden of treatment with the hope that one day individuals with mental health challenges will receive comprehensive and effective treatment without the worry of financial burdens to themselves or their families. Our scholarships offer people the lifeline they need to get well. We recognize that recovery is not linear, as there's no one way that works for everyone. So we've structured our financial assistance offerings to be nimble, meeting the needs of individuals where they are at presently. Some examples of this include an individual with PTSD or trauma providing funds for room and board at a treatment center, which is about $10,500 for 2 weeks. For an alcoholic or addict in early recovery, this might be financial assistance to help with weekly therapy or sober living at $1,500 a month. For a victim of sexual abuse or someone suffering from a process disorder, this might look like funds to support their entry into a partial hospitalization program or safe living environment. We don't discriminate or limit our fund availability based on an individual's specific diagnosis. meaning we don't only help alcoholics or help those with eating disorders or those with suicide ideation. We do, however, employ a thorough and medically backed approach to ensure the funds are being distributed to provide mental health treatment to those who are truly dedicated to their cause and their own recovery. That said, we are in the formation phase of development, and this event, Coffee and Conversation, is designed to not only be informative and raise awareness of mental health challenges present in society, but also raise awareness for funding in support of our mission. The risk of being overly blunt this morning, we can only offer scholarships when people like yourselves who care about the mental well-being of society support us financially. This is not a plea for dollars over the next hour, although we'll happily take them if you're offering, but it is a request for support in terms of attending events like this, sharing our information with those you know, offering to volunteer your time to assist us, spreading the word of our mission, and so on. Given we are essentially a startup, we need all the help we can get. And that's why we are so grateful for our speakers here today who have assisted us in developing this program and brought support to our organization. We're also extremely grateful for you in attending our program this morning, as without you, we wouldn't be able to help anyone. Before we start our program and launching into our first video, I do want to make a disclaimer that since this is a mental health forum, there will be a variety of sensitive topics discussed that we recognize may be triggering for some or hard to hear for others. That said, if you need resources for yourself or a loved one, please reach out and we're happy to provide reference information for you. Thank you. So let's get started. We're going to start off with a video on Project Semicolon.
Hi, my name is Camille, and I am a board member for Recovery Advocate Network. And I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about Project Semicolon. If you've never heard of Project Semicolon, it is an organization that wants to change the conversation around suicide and suicide prevention with things like education and reducing the stigma around mental health. You may have seen someone with a semicolon tattoo like this. I got my semicolon tattoo a few years ago when a friend of mine lost his struggle with mental illness. It's a memorial for him, as well as a reminder to myself to stay on top of my mental health and make it a priority in my life. I have it on my wrist so that I can see it every day, but I also have it there so that other people can see it and ask me what it is. If you don't know what it is, I'm going to share it with you. Because another thing we need to do is reduce the stigma surrounding mental health. Our mental health is so important, and we need to start being able to have open conversations about it. I'd like to share a letter from my dear friend Michelle, who saw my tattoo and decided to get one of her own. She wrote me this letter. This is the only tattoo I have, and it is part of my story. It reminds me of the times I almost chose my exit and that I found my way out of the dark tunnel of depression. As much as I want to overlook my depression and anxiety, I realize how far I've come when I glance at my semicolon tattoo. I love connecting with others who have this tattoo and discussing our journey. It helps to place a face to depression and anxiety and to reach out to those in the dark tunnel.
Hi there, my name is Brittany. I've got my semicolon tattoo. It's kind of a hybrid with a lotus. I am a massage therapist. Massage therapy has really helped me with my depression. And I think back, if I wanted, I did want to end my story. And I made a few, they weren't like actual attempts, but they were more like, I wanted to, but didn't know how, and I'm glad it never happened. But that and a lotus flower is something that it grows from mud, but then it's something beautiful, and that's kind of where I'm at now. 32, almost 33, and I feel like I'm finally kind of meeting myself for the first time. So it's kind of a reminder that it does get better. and I'm glad I continued because life turned out to be pretty damn awesome, not gonna lie. But I've got it for me to remind me to keep on trucking, to keep being me and bloom into something beautiful. So yeah, that's my semicolon story. It gets better.
Hi, my name is Kylee. I want to share a little about my tattoo with you guys. 2 parts to mine, first being the semicolon. The semicolon is a widely used symbol for suicidal thought, suicide ideation. It means that our story's not over. There was a pause, but not a stop. And the butterfly for me, I used to also self-harm. And the butterfly project is something that helped me stop those behaviors and learn how to cope in a more positive way. And if you're not familiar with that, if you have the urge to self-harm or anything, you draw a butterfly on yourself. You can decorate it however you want, and you name it after somebody that you know loves you or somebody that you care about. And when you have the urge to harm yourself, you see that butterfly, you think of that person, and it's an attempt to create more of a positive thought instead of wanting to harm yourself. I wanted to combine the two because while suicide ideation is not always tied to self-harm, for me it was. And I've struggled with self-harm since I was 14. I'm 26 now, and I haven't self-harmed in 4 years. I got the tattoo on the 1-year anniversary of no longer self-harming, and it's really a reminder to reflect on where I am now with my mental health. And even though I still have days I struggle, I can get through them. And it was also a reminder, one of my best friends passed away in high school. So when I got the tattoo, I named it after him. So it's named after Zach. He was one of my biggest encouragers. And it was helpful at first because he wasn't somebody I wanted to let down. So that helped me to keep going. It still helps me to keep going. And hopefully hearing my story and hearing all of these stories from everyone else will help to open up the conversation. Suicide thoughts and self-harm used to be a really taboo subject. And I love the semicolon tattoos because it also identifies, for me, like people that are safe to talk to and people that I know understand where I used to be in my mental health.
David, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is David. I'm a father, husband, filmmaker, designer, and a veteran. And the veteran part is the part that really sort of got my entry into this world. In terms of in terms of background of being around mental health issues, I'm the son of a lifelong alcoholic. I've personally had to deliver my sisters to heroin rehab several times. I had to pull one sister out of a crack house when it got too bad. So I've been around addiction and mental health my entire life. I've been pretty insulated from it though, until I got out of the Army and started becoming much more vocal about the plight of veterans. As you may have heard, on average, 22 veterans take their life every single day. And at one point, I applied for and became the chairman of the Royal Oak Veterans Events Committee. We put on this, one of the things that we did, apart from the Memorial Day Parade and everything like that, we put on the Ruck 22 to raise awareness veteran suicide. We did a 2.2 mile loop and we raised money, we raised funds and food for needy and homeless vets, and everybody would raise a bunch of money and we'd pat ourselves on the back and then we'd go home. And we did this for about 2 years before I actually had to bring up and said, okay, here's the deal. We're not actually raising awareness. I mean, it's just telling people that 22 veterans take their life every day is not helping. We're not giving people the tools to be able to spot ideation, to be able to talk to somebody if they open up. We have this issue in our culture where we're so mortified by the idea of death itself that we will lock up and not even speak, and they don't know how to talk about that. So I push for change in being able to help with veteran suicide, hopefully providing actual help as opposed to just raising money. At the time, my son actually became the student liaison to the Veterans Events Committee and was right there with me helping the fight against veteran suicide. He actually had dog tags that had 800 number and to talk about veteran suicide and all the ways you can help and he took his life in December. The one thing, and probably the only thing that I'm really qualified to speak about, not suicide itself, not ideation itself, is the profound grief and suffering that comes afterwards. I've heard a million times from different sources about people who say, well, things will be better if I'm gone, or this, that, the other thing. The things that people tell each other when they're ideating, that they're the problem, that things would be great if they just weren't there, sort of thing. And the one thing that I want to grab everyone and tell them, like, the earthquake that comes afterward, the devastation that ripples out like an actual earthquake is immense. It's anyone who you think you might be helping in your ideation, if that's something that goes through somebody's head, that people would be better off without me, I want to dispel that 100%. It is a catastrophic wave that radiates out into the community, not just the family and friends, but everyone it touches, and everyone's life is changed by it. The grief, we talk about pain sometimes, but as the opioid crisis showed us, we like to mask pain instead of dealing with it. And that's what that entire epidemic is about. We don't talk about grief. We don't talk about sorrow. For whatever reason, our culture is averse to touching that third rail of actually dealing with emotions. We like to talk a good game about mental health. We've come a long way of destigmatizing certain issues, but there are other issues, like Sarah said, that are still very high up there in terms of stigma. Suicide is one of them. Specifically grief, people don't know, they don't understand it. We have a Hollywood viewpoint of what grief and suffering is, that it's something that, happens, and, some people can come together and they get over it in 90 minutes, or a 30-minute episode of a show, and it's life-changing. I mean, it literally, losing my son literally broke my heart. By April, I had started developing heart issues, and one Saturday morning, I went into full AFib, where the heart just is all over the place and whatnot. I had to go check myself in the hospital, a battery of tests and whatnot. And everybody said, well, we don't know why this is. We don't know why this is, until I mentioned what I had gone through and the crushing stress and anxiety and grief that comes with living with the aftermath of suicide. And every doctor said, oh, yes, that'll do it. That whatever underlying problems you may have in that situation get cranked up to 11. And the one thing that a lot of people have approached me about, we don't even have the words in our culture to really address grief and suffering. So it doesn't surprise me that we really don't have the words to address the underlying issue about ideation itself. It's not just that we need to destigmatize this, that we need to push for a radical transparency, that it's not enough to, turn to a friend and say, hey, how you doing? Because, if you live with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, or, any number of things, especially addiction, somebody reaching out and saying, hey, how you doing? People are very good at responding to those type of things and brushing people aside. We need to push for a radical transparency and openness that we have never seen before. We really want to address this issue. It's not a lack of resources in most instances. Sarah's husband's a physician. It's not for lack of resources. My son wore a dog tag that had an 800 number on it. Like every one of my children, on the back of their student ID has a suicide prevention number on it. I've had a few people say, well, if he only knew or whatnot. He was literally on the committee to help to fight veteran suicide. So a lot of times for things like addiction and mental health issues, it's a lack of resources. But I think we've come very far when it comes to suicide prevention in terms of getting those things out there. The stigma comes from actually using them. We have the 988 number, great. But the problem is if we don't destigmatize the actual use of these resources, then the resources are useless. And I think a lot of people have done heroic work of coming up with any number of ways to reach out and help people. but it's that last step of getting people to actually reach out and grab those resources. And I think that's, if we work on anything in terms of destigmatization, taking that last step to ask for help, to reach out, because the problem is to do that, to reach out requires a sense of hope. And I think a lot of people are at the point where they don't feel hope. I mean, you'd have to have some sort of hope inside to be able to reach out and call a number. I think we need to do a lot more in terms of that last step. I think we have a lot of resources in place, but absolutely the stigma around even asking tough questions, if somebody is considering self-harm, that's a lot heavier than, hey man, are you okay? And we really need to push for a radical transparency and openness that I don't think we have yet. And in terms of grief, there is no one way to grieve. There's no way, no book that you can hand somebody that makes it all better. Some people say time, but that time could be a year, it could be 9 years, it could be 30 years, and your life is never the same after that. I just want everyone to know that it's people who are going through this on the other side, the people who, a lot of people, folks with ideation think maybe they're helping in some way. It is so utterly soul-crushing, devastating, and it not only upends lives, but the health of people, and pushes other people that you love into mental health issues of their own. If I can request anything, it's that we really, the semicolon is a good jumping off point, but we really need to push for an almost uncomfortable level of openness and transparency in follow-up with friends and family to catch it before we have to go down the road of the grief and suffering.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. So true, and it's a conversation that needs to happen. As a follow-up to David's story, I have one more statistic to bring to your attention, and that is how many people die from suicide each day worldwide. Again, to David's point, resulting in that grief and the impact not only on family and friends, but the community. So not annually, not monthly, but how many every single day die from suicide? And the answer to that is more than 2,000. That's a lot. And in fact, it's assumed that this reported rate is actually low due to the probability of underestimated suicide deaths, stigma that surrounds suicidal death. Suicide is actually illegal in some countries, so they don't even report it, which is how we know that this statistic is far too low for what's actual, but far too many for how we should.
I have a question for David. So I'm sure that, when you lost your son, everyone around you was affected and moved also. How do you wish the people around you had broached the subject? I'm sure they've walked around on eggshells and tried to give you space and be respectful, but what would have been the best approach for you, for people to address?
I'll admit, I think we had the best of all possible support groups in the fact that the vast majority of people didn't lean into the old cliche, hurtful tropes. Most people don't know what to say, so they just say, there's no words, I don't know what to say. And that's perfectly acceptable. What if I could give anybody advice if they're dealing with someone who's lost somebody, especially to suicide, is that your job is not to show, oh, I know what you're going through because whatever. They don't mean to be mean, but it comes off so horribly. We did have one person, oh, I know what you're going through because I just lost my grandfather who was 85 and whatnot, and he had stage 4 cancer. And I go, yes, I understand that. Thank you. Not to sound rude, grandfathers are supposed to die. That is the natural order of things, is we get old and at some point we're going to die. But our culture is so averse to even speaking about death that we talk about natural death and we put that in the same camp as something like suicide or overdose or things like that too. And we really need to distinguish between those things. Like, there is a natural order of things, And if you try to either one up somebody of, oh, I'm sorry that you're going through this, but let me tell you my story. And the one thing that I did notice is we're so bottled up that a lot of times people will come up to you and they believe that your grief and suffering is an opening for them to tell their story, because we don't have a system in place for people to be able to get things off their chest. So they go, I'm so very sorry, I don't know what to say. And then we'll launch into a 15-minute long thing about their own issue, which is so not helpful at all. And it makes me hurt inside knowing that these people have walked around with this for years and years and years. If I can give anybody anything, when I talk about radical transparency and openness, is be able to do that with your friends and family now. Do not unload that on somebody who's dealing with the grief of losing a loved one. When you've lost your person, that is not the time you want somebody, you're not a therapist for somebody else. And that's the big one. Luckily, we had a lot of really smart people around us who either ran interference for us or just all kind of knew the right things to say. But there was the occasional, oh, he's in a better place. And no, he's not. But for the most part, we did have a really strong support group. And I, on multiple occasions, would say things like, I don't know how you would do this alone. I don't know how you would do this without a strong support network. I mean, we had a memorial and the city showed up. I mean, I had state representatives and state senators and mayors and everybody showed up. And and it hurt me more knowing that there are people out there that don't have that kind of support. So yeah, think about things that come out of your mouth and don't try to one up. Don't try to, I understand what you're going through because X, Y, and Z. And it's okay to just say, look, there's no words. And that is a perfectly acceptable thing to say.
I'm going to leave you with a message from one of our celebrity supporters, Spencer Garrett.
Hey everybody, this is Spencer Garrett, and I'd like to take a quick moment to talk to you about mental health. Did you know that currently 19.86% of adults in this country are experiencing a mental health crisis? We as a country need to take this epidemic seriously and start to view mental health as something that is every bit as important as physical health. Individuals reporting unmet needs are those seeking treatment and facing barriers to getting the help they need, including no insurance or limited coverage. Organizations like Recovery Advocate Network, or RAND, seek to help with these financial obstacles. Let's help each other by joining the fight for better mental health care support. Thanks for your time.
You just listened to episode 4 from RAND's Suicide Awareness Month webinar, hosted on September 21st, 2022. Portions of this episode were redacted due to the sensitive nature of the content at the request of the individual who participated. This episode kicked off with 3 individuals sharing their personal stories about the semicolon tattoo. Camille got a semicolon tattoo after her friend lost their struggle with mental illness, and she shared how it helps her open the door to difficult conversations about the challenges of suicidal ideations, suicide, and the grief surrounding suicidal loss. Brittany then shared the story of her semicolon lotus hybrid tattoo, her struggle with suicide attempts, and the meaning of the lotus flower. One of my favorites. Kylee shared the Butterfly Project, which aims to help those struggling with self-harm, and why she chose a butterfly semicolon tattoo to celebrate the first anniversary of her not self-harming. She shared that she loves semicolon tattoos because they allow her to be in community with those who are safe to talk to about historically taboo topics, suicide and self-harm. We then heard David's journey through grieving the loss of his son to suicide. He shared its impact on him and provided his thoughts on how individuals can comfort those during difficult times. Finally, one of our celebrity supporters, Spencer Garrett, spoke out about mental health and why we must take it seriously now. Wow, this was an emotional episode for me to edit and publish. I have struggled with suicidal ideations and self-harm due to severe childhood abuse in my kidnapping hostage experience. Additionally, what David said about grief hit home as I remember the months following the loss of my firstborn son, who was stillborn 23 years ago, and the loss of my service dog, Cuba, earlier this year. Which reminds me, If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or, if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. The experiences and advice expressed by these guests are their own stories. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you found this or other podcast episodes meaningful, we encourage you to share them on your favorite social network. It also helps if you give us an awesome rating so that we are more likely to pop up when someone else needs to hear these stories. If you would like to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. Thanks for enjoying your coffee with us as we continue sharing these meaningful conversations together. In case you're wondering, every individual working with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. All funds raised go to support the mission. So, don't forget to love, not like, our podcast and subscribe. We have quite a few amazing guests booked for future episodes. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. So subscribe today. We hope you will also connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events, including fundraising auctions. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at RAN to Wellness. If you wish to provide feedback, please feel free to leave comments on the episode or email us. Now, back to your coffee.